We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. I'm your host, Derek Lambert. I have Dr. Matthew Monger, or really short for Dr. Mott. So be careful. Death is on its way. How you doing, Dr. Mott?
Hi, I'm doing good. Thanks, man. Good to be here.
Thank you for joining me today. I'm fascinated with the subject matter that we're going to get into, how nature became divine, or better yet, how man personified nature, which means man didn't make nature. Nature is, it precedes us. But how we saw nature, maybe giving a little science here, assume agency in other activities in the natural world and said, wow, that thunderbolt must be pissed off at me, or that hurricane, or that earthquake. There's something angry at me. It's out to get me. And therefore, it's the gods. We need to give them our sacrifices. We need to give them this. We need to give them that. And it also makes me kind of project in the future and think about how man, since nature can become divine, how man himself can become divine. So stay tuned for this episode. I know you don't want to miss it, especially if you're one of those people who are sitting on the fence who's seriously curious about why people like me are a skeptic, why people like me appreciate learning these things, but at the same time, I don't draw an ontological conclusion that it's correct. I believe it because it's true. It's just a fascinating part of understanding how we humans have perceived the world around us. So, Dr. Ma, if I may, just so people know who and how they can check you out even deeper, he has, oops, wrong one.
Oops,
here we go. You have an academia page, and tell us your background while you tell us what your academia page is about.
Yeah, so I have kind of a two-track education. I educated both as a linguist and a Semitic philologist, and then also within Old Testament, Hebrew Bible, ancient Near East. So I did my PhD on Dead Sea Scrolls manuscripts of the Book of Jubilees, and there's several articles that I've written about that, about the Book of Jubilees, and the manuscript evidence for it are on my academia page there. And some of them I guess I haven't gotten around to uploading, but maybe I should do that sometime for you guys. But yeah, so and I work with Dead Sea Scrolls manuscripts, manuscript traditions in all kinds of Semitic languages, and have done my work in Akkadian and ancient Near East. Have taught both Akkadian and Syriac, Aramaic, Hebrew. And kind of am interested in the way these religious ideas spread throughout the ancient Near East in different ways, and just kind of interested in old stuff. I mean, that's just kind of what got me interested into the whole field. And so right now I'm working on a book, a scholarly book on the names of the wives of the men in the book of Genesis, because there's no names given to the women in the beginning of the story, and then they get names in these other texts later in antiquity. And so I'm kind of tracking them through all these different languages and cultures and manuscripts in the ancient Near East. So we'll have some fun stuff to talk about there eventually. But for now, I mean, I think the thing that's been an interest for me the past couple of years, and actually ever since I started studying Semitic languages at all, was just this kind of connection between the words and the names of the gods and what they do. And so that's kind of what I want to talk a little bit about today. Just that real way you can see how, like you said in that intro, like you can see how natural phenomenon are being brought into play and being interpreted as something divine. So, yeah.
I love this. And I'm so glad that you know those languages and are able to dive in, because I've been trying to tell people that are on my side of the fence. And when I talk about, when I'm using this analogy, I'm speaking for people who may not be believers. Like, there is so much fun to learn about history, no matter what your position is. Do not imagine that people who believe have the monopoly on being able to enjoy, appreciate, and things like that. And I'm not trying to slam people who are believers either. I'm trying to tell people who engage online and it becomes so much polemical. It's like, dude, there's so many great things to learn about. and to have fun understanding how humans developed and what we think. It's almost like a primatologist who's learning about evolution and understanding how humans evolved. Sure, they might engage with people who think we were made from dirt and mud and a rib 7,000 years ago, but really in reality, there's a lot of fun in learning about evolution, right? Well, I think this is another field in the same vein of like approach us like a primatologist would evolution. Well, we're approaching biblical and ancient literature in the ancient Near East, and we're going to understand better how humans did this. So you have done other interviews, just so I can give a little plug, on Jubilees, on my buddy Gnostic Informant's YouTube channel. You did a debate. You had fun. You and Dr. Kill, Dr. Mott and Dr. Kill joined in on a debate. And here we are. We're doing man-made religion today. And is there anything else? I've tried to find anything else on you. It seems like we're lucky to have you first. So
yeah, you got a monopoly on me for now anyway. So.
Well, just so everybody knows, Google Scholar, type in Matthew Monger. You can find it. Obviously, he's published a lot, or academia. Preferably, you probably want to go here so you can actually get it. But either one, you can go to Google Scholar. And the book that he's already published before, it is in Norwegian. So unless you could speak, the language, well, too bad, until we can get it in English.
Yeah.
I also have the Patreon. Yeah. Well, look, you can at least get true salvation if you join our Patreon. You can also become a YouTube member. I'm trying to give access to everybody who becomes YouTube members to be able to see early content. I have a lot of work that I've done on Patreon that is not found anywhere else on the internet. It literally is hidden in the catacombs of MythVision. And unless you become a priest, you can't go down there and visit it and see what is in those catacombs. But you can become a priest by a simple fee, indulgences, I call them. And check us out. Please help support us. So, Dr. Monger, I want everybody to know we will get to your super chats. Trust me. But I want you to present, because oftentimes someone might go, Dr. Mott, what do you think about the book of Revelation? And it's like, we're talking about only 2,000-3,000 years before that book, and it's not my specialty. We don't mind taking those questions, but let's dive into the material.
Yep. Yeah, it sounds good. And yeah, I mean, I'll answer questions about anything about my opinion on stuff, but my opinion gets less and less valuable as we move away from my field. So if the questions are about stuff we're talking about in my field, I'm happy to answer it. But yeah, but if you ask me whether I like dogs or cats, that kind of stuff seems a little wasted. But yeah. So so should we just jump into it?
Let's jump into it. I just want to say thank you. We have a new angel in heaven here. Gangoff became a member of YouTube membership on MythVision. Listen, how does it feel to know that you can blaspheme at this point and enter the kingdom? It's amazing. Okay, there you go.
Good work, Gangoff. Yeah. So basically, for this kind of short presentation, I just want to go through some of the different things in nature that we have a lot of divinities connected to. And so I'm going to show some of the ancient Near Eastern and also the Greek stuff for these different things, because the Greeks were doing the exact same thing as the Sumerians and the Akkadians and the Hebrews were, of looking to divine explanations for the natural phenomenon. And so we can just start with something simple like the sky, where in Sumerian we have this the word for sky is an or anu, and the symbol for it is basically a star. And so in Sumerian cuneiform you would have written a star to say the word sky, but the word, like the sign, also came to mean a symbol of divinity. So you put this little mark of a sky, this sign here, the star, beside the names of gods, of divinities, so you would know who they are, know that they're divinities. And so the sky itself became almost a symbol of the divine. And I mean, we might think, oh, sure, obviously we think of gods being in the heavens, but there's literally no reason that we would think that, other than that's a place we can't go, or that's a secretive place or something. So these places we don't know about, we can't go to, they automatically become the residence of the gods. So like the skies is a god, is a place for the gods. The seas become a place for the gods. The earth, the depths of the earth will be a place for gods or for hell or for something. Because these are all places we can't go and we can't check. You know, if you say, oh, the gods live over there, you like, you go over there and you're like, dude, where are they? And you just see they're not there. And it's like, the gods live under that rock. So you look under a rock and they're not there. But if you say they lives in the depths of the sea or in the heavens, then suddenly you've got this, you know, place that you actually can't go check and we can't understand. And so it's easier to kind of place it there. But in Hebrew, then this word is shamayim, and that, you know, it doesn't seem that the heavens are deified in that way in Hebrew at all, but we definitely see it as part of epithets, so as divine names for other gods. So like one of the epithets, one of the names that they call Baal or Baal is Baal Shemon, which means like in Canaanite means God of the heavens. And so you get these kind of like very clear associations with the lords of the sky. And in Greek, the word for heaven or for sky is Uranos, which is Uranus, so the planet, but also, or Uranus. I'm sorry, I probably said that in the uncouth manner that I learned as a child. And Uranos is the god of the sky, also in Greek, right? So like one of these primeval gods. So we have this phenomenon that they are definitely deified. They're definitely talked about in that manner. And then like later on, like Zeus becomes kind of this sky god kind of character and takes over that phenomenon of being the one to do the sky stuff. But as we'll see, Zeus also, you know, does stuff later on. Another thing that's very mysterious, and you mentioned this in the intro, is this thunder thing. So thunder gods are also a really common thing in both the ancient Near East and pretty much everywhere. So in the Sumerian Akkadian world, we have this god called Adad or Ishkur, who is the god of thunder, and so Adad is just like associated literally with this phenomenon of thunder. And so if you want to worship, you know, a god, then you're probably going to want him to keep his thunder away, right? So this is that kind of fearful worship, not a gracious worship. So it's kind of one of those phenomenon that when you don't understand it, then you're going to want to have somebody to control that thing for you. And this then in later, both in the biblical stories and in other Canaanite religions, then the name Hadad is associated with this exact same god. So it's probably, I mean, it's the same etymology and everything that we have. Hadad is the god of thunder in Canaan, but then Baal kind of takes over and usurps the role of Hadad and becomes the god of the storm, god of the thunder. And so that's one of those things that also is really interesting to see in these cultures that relate to each other throughout the let's say period up to the beginning of the Middle Ages almost, that there are a lot of different gods, a lot of different ideas of the divine that are floating around, that are developing. And there are these gods that kind of jump in and take over the role of other gods. And this is one of those things we see throughout the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament, that Yahweh takes on characteristics that are generally otherwise assigned to other gods. And then, so Zeus is here again because Zeus has the thunderbolt. He's the god of thunder. He does all that stuff, and he has control of it. And what we see is that sometimes he's pretty unpredictable because Zeus can get angry, and same way that Baal can, that just chucks his thunderbolts down and can, you know, take the lives of mere mortals just because he's angry, and he's got that kind of weapon that he can use against humanity. And then, of course, you would want to have some kind of methods to control this. And the worship of the gods would be that method of controlling it. Another one that I think is maybe even more fun is the idea of the gods of the sea or gods of water. And this really goes back to the Sumerian, Akkadian idea of how the world came to be. So in the Sumero-Akkadian creation stories, we have basically two types of water that are the two primeval gods, the two first gods. We have Tiamat, who is the abyss, the deep, the salt water, and Tiamat is the one who is is chaotic and scary and dangerous. And then on the other hand, we have Apsu or Apsum, who is kind of the deep freshwater. And the freshwater and the salt water are what mix together in creation in a way and create the other gods and become the source of everything. And when we look at the ancient Near Eastern cosmology, like how the world actually looks, we have this idea that there is salt water that's below the earth and that is kind of surrounding the earth. And then there's fresh water over the earth. And so the rain is like a sign of this fresh water leaking down or dripping down, right? And that's fresh, but the salt water that's in the sea is not fresh. It doesn't sustain us. It's scary. And so these are like two different things that need to be dealt with in different ways. And the salt water as a kind of an enemy or as a scary god goes through many different stories in the ancient Near East throughout the Akkadian stuff. And then also when we look at the Canaanite stories, the Ugaritic stuff, that we have all these different stories where the sea is the main enemy. And in Hebrew and in Canaanite, then this is Yam, who is like the god of the sea. And in some of the Ugaritic tales, Baal or Baal fights against Yam. Like that's one of his main enemies, is the god of the sea. So the god of the heavens versus the god of the sea. So we have these stories throughout this time, throughout the ancient Near East, that are giving a body almost, giving features of divinity, but also of humanness to these gods. And they have interactions and they get angry at each other and they fight. And so all of this stuff is this projection of the human understanding onto what they think of as the divine. And then, of course, Poseidon is the god of the sea in Greek. And so we have like this kind of continuity between the ancient Near East and the Greek in this, that we have these gods that are very similar in what they're doing and the way they're acting and what they control. The sun, I think, is another great example. I mean, who doesn't worship the sun? So in Norway, this is something that I really observe on a regular basis, because Norwegians, it gets really dark here in the winter, and Norwegians kind of, I guess, are grown up with this, that like the first day of sun in the spring, like people just go out and stand there and stare at the sun. And where my wife's from, she's from the west coast of Norway, and there it like rains like 300 days a year or something like that. And so when the sun shines, like people there will seriously take off work and go and just stand outside and just like look at the sun or lay down, and it really feels like they're worshiping the sun. And I think most people would say like they'd have more faith in the sun than in God or something. But then anyway, so Dingir Utu or Shamash is the god of the sun in the Sumero-Akkadian world, and this is basically exactly the same in Hebrew. So Shamash is the name for the sun and is the god of the sun. And we see this in a number of texts in the Hebrew Bible as well, that the sun is kind of seen as a known divinity. But this is also one of those things that we see in Greek. So Helios is the god of the sun, or is the sun, and is of course then the name of the sun. And these gods have the power to control it, right? And so one of the scariest things that could happen is that these gods would rebel or revolt against us and stop doing their thing, like not be the sun anymore, not shine on us, not give us the warmth or make the crops grow. And so again, like these things kind of perpetuate this idea that you have to worship something, and then you worship it, and then the thing happens that you're worshiping, asking for, and just kind of continues. But at some point people start asking the question whether that's actually helping. The moon also is a god, of course. So Yareah or Yarich is the word in Hebrew or in Canaanite, and the moon is Selene in Greek. I mean, we have these. Yeah, we have the same phenomenon with the moon as with the sun, especially in ancient times when the idea that it was actually sunlight reflecting off the moon that was giving the light, like that wasn't, people didn't know that. You have this thing that shows up and you don't understand it, but it's an important part of how you navigate the world. Another god that I tend to identify with, I guess, is death. So the god of death is also very much personified and deified in the ancient Near East. Here is Mot, the god of death, is in Hebrew, and same in Ugaritic and in Canaanite. We have this god of death that makes his rounds. One of the places where we really see this very clearly is in Isaiah, where the text actually says that God will swallow up death forever, and the Lord God will wipe away the tears from their faces and all that. And like this plays directly on Canaanite mythology, where Baal fights against death, and death swallows Baal actually, and he has to be like saved by another goddess. And there's this whole saga about it, like the battle of Baal and death. And so this plays on that tradition and says like, no, but Yahweh will swallow death. And so it's like this beautiful wordplay, but again, it's the god of death, right? And so we've got this thing that is a natural phenomenon. People stop breathing, people die, but to have a sort of a god that controls that makes that happen is an important thing for navigating the world among these things that we just don't understand. And we also see it in Hosea 13. I shall ransom them from the power of Sheol. I shall redeem them from death. So I shall redeem them from the god of death, from Mot. Oh, Mot, where are your plagues? Oh, Sheol, where is your sting? All right. So this is like, again, it's giving us this picture that if you think about it very literally, it's saying that God is, I mean, the words of the prophet are saying God would literally go and pay your way out of hell by giving something to the god of death. Right? And so there's a very clear mythology here that kind of comes to the surface when you read it in that way. And then one more thing that is like pretty clearly, I think it's pretty clear anyway, is this idea that like grain and new wine are also seen as gods. They're also names of gods. So in Hosea 7, for instance, we have woe to them, for they have fled from me, destruction to them. They have rebelled against me. I want to deliver them, but they've lied to me. They do not pray to me, but howl in distress on their beds, and they slash themselves for grain and new wine, but turn away from me. And then it goes on and it talks about Baal and stuff like that. But the words for grain and new wine are Dagon and Tirosh. And these are names of gods and goddesses in the Canaanite pantheon. And so when you read this as an ancient Israelite, or you hear this and say they slash themselves for Dagon and for Tirosh, that's like they're slashing themselves for these other gods. And this is actually a phrase that's used a few times in the Hebrew Bible, both in Genesis and in Deuteronomy. We get this grain and new wine thing. And these are two gods that are just associated with each other in a number of texts. And they were a part of the everyday life. And what would be the purpose? But yeah, it makes sense. You worship the god of grain in order to get grain, right? You want it to grow. And so you make your sacrifices to the god of the grain. And the new wine, yes, you make your sacrifices to the god of the new wine. I mean, same way as you would to Bacchus or Dionysius or whoever. Like it's a part of the understanding in this time that these gods give power or have power over the phenomenon that they represent. And one of the things that I think makes it very clear that this was the fact, this was the way it was in ancient Israel, is what we find, for example, here in Deuteronomy 17, where it says, suppose a man or woman is discovered among you in one of your villages that the Lord your God is giving you, who sins before the Lord your God and breaks his covenant by serving other gods, by worshiping them, the sun, the moon, or any other heavenly bodies, which I have not permitted you to worship. And when it is reported to you and you hear about it, you must investigate carefully. And if it's true that such a disgraceful thing is being done in Israel, you must bring them to your city gates, that man or woman who has done the wicked thing, and you must stone that person to death. So there's like a very clear problem that's being addressed here. And that's that people are worshiping these other gods. It's not these laws are not put into place or written about in the priestly documents as a way of saying, well, these things that never happen, we should just write it up just in case. But these are what's going on, that they're trying to say, we wish people wouldn't be doing it, but that's the way people were living. They were worshiping the sun or the moon or the heavenly bodies or the grain or the new wine or whatever. And the laws that are being made reflect that reality. One more thing before we can take a break and do some questions. I think Psalm 148 is another great example of the way all of these, all of the heavenly bodies and actually all the natural phenomenon are seen as being maybe not on par with God, not at the same level as Elohim, as the high God, but they are seen as being something in the heavenly realm that can worship God. So Psalm 148 is a praise to the Lord. And it says, like, praise the Lord from the sky. So we have Hashemayim, and from the heavens, right? Hashemayim again. Praise him, all his angels. Praise him in his heavenly assembly. Praise him, sun and moon. Praise him, you shiny stars. Praise him, O highest heaven. Praise him, the waters above the heaven. And let them praise the name of the Lord, blah, blah, blah. Praise from the earth and from the ocean depths. Notice now we have both the waters above the earth and the ocean depths. Oh, fire and hail, snow and clouds, stormy wind that carries his orders, mountains and hills and trees and cedars and animals and cattle and creeping things and birds and kings of the earth and nations and princes and leaders and young men and blah, 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 blah. So we work our way through the heavenly realm, through all of the natural phenomenon that we don't understand, and move down to people and animals and stuff like that. And so these things that are praising God, right? They are interpreted as deities in some way. And we know this because in the 2nd century, maybe 1st century BC, the book of Jubilees is reading this. The author of the book of Jubilees, or at least of the creation story from Jubilees, is reading this text, Psalm 148, and understands it as a problem because they're saying all these things can't be deities. They can't be gods. And so the author says, no, they must be angels. And so the author of Jubilees makes sure to make it clear that all these things that are worshiping God in Psalm 148 are listed up as angels. And so on the first day, he created the heavens, which are above the earth, and the waters, and all the spirits which minister before him, and the angels of presence, the angels of sanctification, angels of spirit of fire, and angels of spirit of winds, and the clouds, and the darkness, and the snow, and the hail, and the frost, and the resoundings, and the thunder, and the lightning, and the cold, and the heat, and the winter, and the spring, and the harvest, and the summer, and the spirits of the creatures on heaven and the earth. Whew. It's a mouthful, but like he's just making sure that there's nothing out there that can be seen as being even close to God that's not created by God, but they're still seen as divine beings. They're still seen as divine beings. So the clouds and the darkness and the snow and the hail and the fire and the winds and the thunder and all that are being seen as divine beings. But what Jubilees is doing is saying they're just a step below God and he has control of them. So that's that bit, I think. Yeah, I mean, that's that
There's
bit.
a lot there to really chew on, by the way.
Yeah.
Are we taking a break? Is that what you want to do?
Well, yeah, let's take a break from me just talking.
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot there. There's a lot there to consider and how that changes over time, but they still can't let go of it. Yeah, what are angels? It's kind of interesting that this idea comes up. So, all right, just started from the beginning. We'll hit these super chats and then we'll continue wherever you want to go.
Nice.
Again, thank you for becoming a member of MythVision's YouTube channel. It feels good to be cleansed from all your sins. The many natural phenomena in the world have, played a role, which they're actually divine beings. They're beyond angels. We're not going to try and belittle them. And thank you so much for doing that. So, Sages and Pages says, which intellectual do you think came closest to grasping the nature of religion? Karl Marx, Sigmund Freud, or Max Weber?
Oh, wow. Sages and Pages. I mean, putting me on the spot here. So I mean, I think they all have their points in different ways. I mean, Weber's a sociologist, Freud's a psychologist, and Marx is a politicist or a political scientist, basically. I mean, if we think about them like that, then I think they all describe religion in ways that make sense within the realm they're speaking to. So I don't consider myself Marxist in thinking about religion necessarily, but I think he makes some keen observations, and I think Freud also. I don't know. I like. I have a hard time putting those in an order, but I do think that Weber's probably come closest to where we've gone, or has set the tone maybe for modern study of history of religions in a more broader sense than the other two. So I guess Weber would be what I would say is more influential maybe on my thinking of the nature of religion, but the other two definitely have pretty solid credentials and points within their realms. So
Thank you. Appreciate that. Sages and Pages. Stop Scamming Man. Hi, do you think Deuteronomy was writing suspiciously found in the reign of Josiah, or that it was a document purporting to be this?
Yeah. So was Deuteronomy what was described in the Book of Kings as being the text found in the temple during the reign of Josiah? This is a notorious claim by biblical scholars, and the way I would answer it is that I think the Book of Deuteronomy is intended to be understood as the book that is mentioned in the text. But that doesn't mean that the text nor Deuteronomy actually refer to the time or can be traced to the time of Josiah. So we simply don't know enough about what's happening in pre-exilic Judah to say whether this text was written or if Josiah found something, because Kings is a text from after the exile or from exilic or post-exilic times. And so it was written to tell this story as well. So I'm not convinced that it was actually suspiciously found or that it was made to serve the purpose at that time, but I think the two are related. So I think the story of the finding of it and Deuteronomy are related. Yes.
Thank you. Stop Scamming Man. Kamal, thank you for the super chat. Can you ask Dan Jacobs for me if he could make his own channel debunking, exposing rabbinical Judaism? You had him on your show once. Thank you. Dan is actually a Patreon member, which means Dan is shielded from any abomination he may commit. But I'm also already in the works in communicating and having him come on to dive into interesting stories that are not only in like the Talmud and the Mishnah and the Babylonian Talmud and things like that, and the issues throughout that, but also in dealing some of the things they got wrong and really taking a deep dive in there. So yeah, I'd be happy to do that. Thank you so much for the super chat. Stop Scamming Man. The Book of Jubilees seems rather Gentile phobic. Did this influence social attitudes in Ethiopia and nearby? Did its deep dive into what nearly became of Judith and why impact views on women?
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Oh, thanks. Stop Scamming Man. Stop Scamming Man. Yeah. Anyway, so yes, Jubilees is very Gentile phobic. Jubilees is very clearly written in order not only to say that there's that Israel is elect or that Judah is elect, but that there is a specific remnant, a specific small group, and that everyone has to keep their keep their marriages within the group, within that group. And so that in that way, it fits very much with the thinking of the Essenes and with the Qumran community, the Ahad or whatever. So it seems like that's a pretty important feature in Gentiles, in Jubilees. And I think that it's a stretch to say that it impacted views in Ethiopia, because we simply don't know what influence Jubilees had in Ethiopia until the, say, 15th century. Then we start to see manuscripts and we start to see some traditions surrounding it, but we just don't know about the earliest history in Ethiopia. But I think that I don't think we see I don't think we see any big differences in Ethiopia than we do in other nearby countries from the region that could be attributed to this. I think there's just as bad of views on both Gentiles and on women and on other subjects in a lot of the other both Christian and Jewish literature that was floating around from that time. So I don't think we can blame Jubilees or any of the stories that are there specifically, but I think it fits into the more general movements of the time that there was a lot of, whatever you want to call it, xenophobia or Gentile phobia or whatever, and also just the general patriarchy that was pretty normal.
Thank you, Stop Scamming Man. Good question, Cheryl. Thank you so much for the super chat. But this is a really good one because I've seen a lot of people asking this. Can you speak more about the book you're working on, Unnamed Women? And then the latter part is, I think, really relevant to what we just saw you do at the end of the first part of this presentation, and that is explain what the difference between a god and an angel is.
Yep. Okay. So part one. Basically in antiquity, let's start at the beginning. So in Genesis 1 to 11, we get the generations basically from Adam to Abraham, and the only two women that are given in the direct line are Eve and Sarah. So we have like the first and the last, but then there are all these generation of men that are named and are given agency even in the birthing of children. So that like they may be born is kind of the way their genealogies are described. And so we have these lists of men, and that Seth gave birth to Enosh, or made Enosh be born, and Enosh made the next one be born, and so on and so forth. But we don't get the names of any of the women. Well, in the Book of Jubilees, there are women that have names, and they are included in the story with their names, but it seems very, very likely that they were put in maybe partly from interest, but also because they tell a story. And the names of the women in Jubilees basically tell the story of why Abraham ends up getting born in in Babylonia, in a place full of sinners, I guess, from the view of Jubilees. And that is because at some point during the progression from Adam to, or actually after Noah, so after Noah, between Noah and Abraham, they start marrying foreign women. And it's these foreign women that then lead them astray and lead them to basically to the starting point in which is biblical, which is why it has to kind of be the starting point, but they need an explanation. Well, these names get extracted from Jubilees and get kind of spread throughout Greek, Syriac, Arabic, Armenian, and Hebrew sources all throughout the ancient and medieval Near East and Europe. But there's also a second text written in Syriac in the 6th century called the Book of the Cave of Treasures that also gives names to all of the women of these generations. And those are also spread very widely, at least within Syriac and Arabic contexts. But then some of the names from this actually end up being transmitted all the way into European vernacular Bibles, like in French, English, German, and even Old Norse. And so basically in the book, I'm telling this story. I'm going through all the sources and showing how these sources interacted with each other, where they show up, and then looking at the cool details of the manuscripts and the ways that these things have been transmitted from one culture to another and across religious and linguistic and geographical boundaries. And then the difference between the God and an angel, well, I mean, when you're talking about made up things, I guess the difference can be whatever you want it to be. But I guess that was a bit of a cop out. But so when we look at the Hebrew Bible, if we use that as our example, there is no real definite line between gods and angels, because the angels are, in the oldest texts, are messengers for God, and that's literally what the word angel means in Hebrew. It's a messenger, and the thing is that many of the texts that mention angels also mention God. And so we have this kind of uncertainty. Is it God? Is it an angel? Is it a burning bush talking? We don't really know, but like there's angels and there's gods and there's all these kind of things. And so it seems that in the kind of the older understanding was that an angel was maybe an apparition, or as it was a way of presenting a God presenting itself on earth. But what happens is that throughout the first millennium, I would say, BC, we get this kind of development where it's more and more important to make sure that God is holy and God is separate from people and God, because if you see God, then you would die. So angels couldn't be God, and they couldn't just be kind of God. They would have to be something else. And so angels are kind of degraded into being lesser deities, something that exists in the realm outside of human nature or whatever, but which still are in a way in a different place in the hierarchy, in the spiritual hierarchy. And so that text that I was talking about, like Jubilees, I think it's a really important text for understanding this, because it shows us this movement of natural phenomena, ideas of gods, away from being able to be on the same level of God, but being still something supernatural and divine. And so when we get to later Judaism and Christianity, then these angels are sometimes really, really important, and sometimes are just seen as something that it doesn't even matter, and so we see, like in more spiritual directions in Christianity and Judaism, then angels get really important. They're really important in the book of Enoch and in Jubilees and in those directions, and do things, interact with humans. They do a lot of the transmission of knowledge and of secret knowledge and that sort of thing, but there's still something separate from humans. And so in reality, I don't know if there's a real good definition of the difference between them, or even what an angel is, because it seems to change depending on the text and depending on what people want to get out of them.
I think it's interesting too how it talks about heavenly tablets, and then there seems to be later tradition in Second Temple Judaism. We see a hint of it in Paul. The Gnostics like to really jump on this stuff, and they kind of mention like, well, the Torah was given by angels.
Oh yeah.
Does that mean it wasn't given by God?
Yep.
There's a huge question.
Yeah.
And is this playing into Paul's idea, where a lot of scholars think Paul's not really pro Torah? He's not really he's one of these weird Jews who thinks that like hey, this is not of God. These are angels. This is of angels or something. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I don't think that. So maybe, yeah, I think
Or
you're right
maybe
that
it's
there's
not
some.
perfect.
I think
Maybe
you're right that there's some scholars that would say that. But what I
Yeah.
think really is happening is that it just shows that that Paul was a part of Judaism that was much more nuanced than we've traditionally understood it as.
Mhm.
And so when Paul says that in Galatians, he says, because we know that the law was mediated by an angel. I mean, he doesn't say yeah, you might have heard that or something. You know, he's like, we know.
Right.
And so this was an accepted position that the law must have been mediated by an angel. And in some of the texts, there's an angel there. But it's just this whole problem of Moses going up and down the mountain that just gets in the way. But it's clear that during this period, during late Second Temple Judaism, there was the idea that there was a law written on some sort of heavenly tablets or heavenly whatever, and that it was an angel that needed to transmit that. And shockingly, 600 years later, Muhammad is doing the same thing, right? There's an angel reading the heavenly book, telling him what to write down. Yeah. So this is like a very clear tradition in the ancient Near East that goes all the way up to Islam, that there's the heavenly thing, and the angel's job is to kind of transmit from the heavenly realm to the human realm.
Thank you, Cheryl, for that great question. I was waiting for somebody to actually bring that angel one up. Stop Scamming Man says, hi, do you think it's accurate to speak of J, E, and P sources?
Do I think it's accurate? So I'm not a fan of the traditional documentary hypothesis because I don't believe there were documents that encompassed all of what we would call J or E or P or anything like that. So some people talk about a supplementary hypothesis where you kind of have a text that's developing and being edited, and then strands are coming in. And I think that's probably a more likely way of looking at it. I think there were a lot more sources than J, E, and P. So I think that there were probably some major strands that were combined, and there's probably are parts of what we consider to be the J and the E and the P sources. I think there's a pretty convincing argument that after the fall of Samaria in 722, that a number of northern intellectuals would have made their way to Jerusalem, bringing their stories that were very parallel to the stories of the south of Judah, and that could be why there's a J source and an E source that have very similar stories that give us doublets and things like that. I think that it is also very likely that large parts of the Pentateuch were written by people in the priestly milieu, as we say, in the priesthood, because there's just so much crap about sacrifices and the way you do things in the temple and stuff like that. So it makes sense there as well. But that they were distinct sources that were sewn together in some kind of masterpiece, and that we can unravel the sources, I don't think that's accurate.
Thank you so much for that. Book of Jubilees and Enoch available on YouTube in audio book form, by the way, folks. Thank you, Stop Scamming Man. Appreciate the tip. Just a Dude, what is the potential relationship between, and I cannot read this, and Israelism? From Sarah to Isaac to Jacob, Israel, as well as its relationship to the importance of dust, clouds, and laughter in Israelism.
Israelism? I don't even know if I know what Israelism is. What is Israelism?
Help me out, Just a Dude.
Dude, you're gonna have to give us a little more. I honestly, I'm gonna bear my lack of intellectual prowess here and say I'm not sure what we're talking about when we're talking about Israelism.
I'll come back to it. We'll hit Max Power. Thank you, Max Power, for the super chat. Any thoughts on Michael Heiser's view of the heavenly council, where the Almighty allots non-Israelite nations to these other gods?
Yeah, it's true. So, I mean, I think there's, I mean, we have this text in Deuteronomy that now is confirmed by the finds in the Dead Sea Scrolls that it's like that Yahweh's allotment was Israel, but El is the heavenly leader of the heavenly council who's divvying up the lands, and I mean, I just think that's that's a part of the Bible. It's a part of Israelite religious history, but I don't think that those gods existed, so I don't think it really happened. But I mean, I think that Heiser's view of the heavenly council like that is probably the best way of reading it. So yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's
Just a
easy.
dude said Israel, or call it Abrahamism. So going back to the super chat, I guess it's just within the vein of Abrahamic religion. What is the potential relationship between? And I don't know what that symbol. It's really small.
Yeah, I can't even see what the symbol is.
Spell that out for me, just a dude. Just
I can't see it on my screen, but I see. I mean, so I'm not sure what the question is really. I mean, are we talking
complex.
about trying to get from the? I mean, it's relationship to the importance of dust and clouds and laughter and Israelism. I'm sorry, man. I'm not up to snuff.
Hold on, that link is the link to this Sumerogram. Rewrite the question in a more simple way in a couple different, because you spent $10. I want to make sure I cover your question.
Yeah, well,
so write it out in simpler forms of what you're trying to get at with laughter and things. I think you were trying to crunch stuff in because Super Chat only allows you so many characters. I'll get to the next one. We'll come back and then we'll continue our the presentation. Greg Kosarick, thank you for the Super Chat and for being a member. I really appreciate it. Are you aware of the studies that the same part of the brain lights up if you ask a person about what they believe versus what their God believes?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of really good psychology out there that definitely shows that people are capable of imagining themselves into a state in which they believe that they are talking with God and that they are hearing God, but that the same part of their brain is doing it, whether they're told to do a creative writing task or they're actually conversing with God. And so there's the human brain is amazing. That's kind of my conclusion from these kind of things, that we can go into states of ridiculous transcendence, and our brains can do that too. Our brains can do a lot of stuff that makes us say, crap, wow, this is ridiculous. This must be brought about by God.
Okay, so one of these comments that I was thinking about earlier on what you said, before we get just a dude's response, hopefully he'll follow up with it. You were talking about agency in the natural phenomena that we've been going into, and I thought about prayer.
Yeah.
And like how humans attributed to the natural world, like all of these natural phenomena that are beyond our control, we said there's something in control of it, and we got to appease that something, which is a God usually.
Yeah.
Isn't modern prayer the same thing in another way, where it's like, pray for that person who's dying of cancer, because it's a phenomena we can't control.
Yep.
And maybe once we have medicine that can actually, maybe we already do, who knows? There's some people out there who think that they do. You just don't have enough money, whatever. Anyway, I'm not going there. I'm just making the point. Like, once that's being handled and we humans can control it, well, then we'll be praying for something else that goes beyond our reach. And God's always seem to be just beyond anyone's reach. Another comment I had, and then just the dude did respond, is this makes me think of the myth of the lost tribes of Israel, even the myth of the 12 tribes, because I'm interviewing the scholar Andrew Tobolowski. I hope I pronounced
Yeah.
his name.
Yeah, you
Friday.
got him? Oh, awesome.
Friday. We're going into the
Great.
myth of the 12 tribes.
Yeah, he's really cool. His book is amazing. So yeah.
They're always just beyond the river, just on the other side of the mountain. You can never get to them. And then when we do get on the other side of the mountain, they're on the other side of that other mountain. Finally, later in history, you find out, because I read it's what is his name? The 12 tribes of the history of the lost tribes of Israel by I can't think of it right now. I'm scratching my head here.
Yeah,
But
no
the point is like once we've gone across the world, we started going, you know what? We've already traveled. We haven't found them. Maybe they're one of these people groups like the Native Americans or people in Africa, or we keep finding people that we think maybe it's them. And anyway, the myth is still alive. It never dies.
Yeah. And I mean, and these are things that are, again, reflections of how our brains work. I mean, we tend to ritualize things. We tend to look for answers, and we tend to not accept that there are no answers or that we can't get access to them. I mean, so a lot of people would rather there be a creator behind the universe, no matter what the arguments for or against it are, quite simply because having meaning feels better than not.
Right. Just a dude said, and I don't even know. So whatever these symbols are, is the first attestation of the name Israel. The next symbol is the first logogram of Israel. It is Sahar, which is Epirum, cognate to Hebrew.
Okay, so thank you for writing in big letters. Now I see what you're doing. And then the original question was just asking whether or not that I think that the cuneiform is connected to the story of Israel. Is that kind of what you're asking about? Yeah.
Yeah. What is the relationship between them?
Yeah. I mean, like the thing is, I'm not convinced that there's a this kind of overarching ancient story that is the Israel story. I think we don't have evidence of Israel anywhere in Canaan even until like the 12, 11, 10th centuries. And so like having it be some kind of ancient thing I don't think is realistic. And so then being actually a Sumerian phenomenon, it's just I don't think there's any real connection to it at all. And whether it's then some kind of Akkadian pickup, I don't know. I don't think there's a causal connection from that side. And so then when we look at like the story of Sarah and Isaac and Jacob, Israel, and all that, it's there's definitely a development from earlier traditions where Israel, because Jacob given the name Israel and all that, but I don't see that the things of the dust, the clouds, the laughter, all this is important in Israel. It's just they're motifs that show up in a couple of stories, and they're not central. Like it's not something that's been created around these kind of things. It's more of they're just motifs that show up in the story. Like the Isaac and the laughter thing it disappears like after the Isaac story. It's I don't see it as a running thread or anything through the story. So it might be deeper than what I see, but you're welcome to comment back if you see something that you want to explain to me, but I don't see it as a realistic thing.
Thank you, Just a Dude. Once again, wanted to try and make sure I tried to get your question. Indo, what was with the religion's obsession with the savior afterlife, where this originate? Also, what made Christianity stand out among similar religions? So we're outside of your expertise, but
definitely. Well,
yeah.
So I think the religious obsession with the savior afterlife, this is like religious studies 101. It's what do we do with the fact that animate people, animals, whatever, cease to be so. And the fact that I then will also cease to be animate one day. That's like the basic fear or basic obsession of I guess of religion. I mean, so the question is, do we get born again? Like we find in Hinduism or Buddhism or even ancient Greeks. That's what Plato thought, right? That's what Plato and Aristotle thought, was that we just get born again. So
they didn't like the Jews, because Jews, when they sacrificed, they thought maybe you're killing one of your ancestors who's reincarnated into a animal form, actually.
Yep.
So there's, yeah.
And so this reincarnation is a way of solving the problem of the afterlife, because if you just can keep being reincarnated, then you don't have to worry about it, because your soul isn't dying, so you get to continue. And then there's that place where you can go and be in the afterlife if you break free from that cycle or whatever. And I think that's just this existential fear that's behind it. It's a psychological problem that has a sociological and religious solution. That is, we agree that these are the things that happen, that push us there, and we believe it because our parents tell us, and the priests tell us, and the whatever everybody else tells us, that that's the way it is, and so we interpret our life within that model. And that's just the way religion works, and so where does it originate? Like, it's always been there. Like Gilgamesh is about his existential fear of both losing his friend and then his own mortality. Like that's literally like the oldest story we have. And that's what it's about. It's about, what do I do? My friend died. I want to save him. I want the tree of life. Or the plant of life, or whatever. How do I live? How do I survive? How do I not die? So, and what make Christianity stand out among other religions? They convinced the emperor, and the emperors convinced each other long enough that it lasted, I guess. That's kind of my take on it.
It's a shortcut to Constantine, but
I mean, it's like, I'm not sure. I don't think we have a really good explanation ever. I mean,
I imagine that, by the time you get to Constantine, I imagine him looking for a political solution to unify, because so much division's happening. If you have polytheism and it seems everybody's got a different god in a different area, you're not united in the same way if you're under the same umbrella with the same ideology. So you want to unify that ideology, and you see there's splinter sects of that monotheistic ideology. You need to hone it in and have a creed set so that everybody sticks to the same idea of that monotheistic ideology. And Judaism, I heard, was even tempted with, but it was like, they're just too stuck in their ways, whereas we can modify this Christian thing. And of course they did, in a different way.
Yeah. So, well, and I think too, we have the whole, I mean, Christianity was a religion that really appealed to the poor. It appealed to the masses, and it was something that said, like, no matter what the suffering you have in your body and in your life and everything, like, have no fear. Jesus is coming back, and you'll be made perfect, and you'll get to live for heaven, and you don't have to do anything. You don't have to be anything. You just, like, join us, and you're good to go. And, like, it's a nice thing to be told. Like,
right.
I mean, it's a good message. Like, I mean, we've both been there, Derek. We know that it can tempt you, that message.
Absolutely. Thank you, Indo, Sages, and Pages. I think that'll wrap that up on the super chats here, I believe, and then we can get back to your presentation. Yep. What do you think is most plausible origin for the cult of Yahweh as opposed to Elohim?
Yeah, so I think Yahweh probably is it was a southern Levant god. Came from the oldest text we have kind of refer to him as a warrior god from the mountains, or from the came out of the hills. And so I think he probably was a divinity that was known from a people group in the southern Levant, and came out of the desert as a warrior god kind of thing. And that was convincing enough that he hung around, I guess, got the power.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I did a video with Jericho. I can't remember how to pronounce his name. He's in Southern Africa on the origins of Yahweh. And it is not easy. Like, it is just so complex trying to sift through everything he was describing. I got to do a follow-up with him, but it is very, very complex. Anyway, thank you so much for that, Sages and Pages. Just a dude is following up that we're done. We'll continue. Sorry. The logogram is also, was it Sadu for mountain? This means that in Genesis 16 through 17, the gram is related to Shaddai, Isaac, Ishmael, etc. In Hebrew, the word for laughter is related to the words for clouds.
Yeah, but I mean, and again, I get what you're getting at. So I mean, Shadu, mountain, and Shaddai, and El Shaddai, and all these things. It's fine that there's a connection, but there's not a causal connection between the logogram and the Hebrew Bible. So the fact that there's etymological similarities between Akkadian and Hebrew isn't an explanation for why the Hebrew Bible is written in the way it is. So I let's see. Yeah, you heavens above rain down my righteous. Let the clouds shower down. Let the earth open wide and salvation spring up, and the righteous flourish. And the Lord have created it. Yeah, I mean it's nice. And we, I mean, I agree. There's a lot of mythical language, and there's a lot of stuff that definitely plays on the fact that the Hebrews have both etymological and mythological similarities with the Akkadians. But I don't think that's the cause of it. Like, I don't think that's why. Is it that there's not a cause? You just don't see it. Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe I just don't see it. But I just like, I literally don't see it. Like, and I think my model for understanding where the Hebrew Bible comes from doesn't make sense if they're actually interpreting logograms at that level in order to create the stories. So I mean, I get what you're getting at, but I think it's, but anyway.
Well, thank you so much. We're caught up here. Let's continue then, I guess.
Yep. So this might get a little technical and a little texty, but I'm just going to go through one of the things that I think is kind of the most obvious way human touch is in the Hebrew Bible. And that's in the development of the festival calendar, like how you should sacrifice to God on the feast days that are prescribed. So let me see if I can get the right window here. There we go. So when we read about the three festivals, we read about them several different times in the Pentateuch. At least 3 times, some of them 4 times are described. And so, like in Exodus 23, we get this very bare bones description. 3 times in the year you shall hold a festival for me. You shall observe the festival of unleavened bread, as I commanded you. You shall not eat unleavened bread for 7 days at the appointed time in the month of Abib, for you came out of Egypt. No one shall appear empty-handed. And then you shall observe the festival of harvest, of the first fruits of your labor, of what you sow in the field. And you shall observe the festival of ingathering at the end of the year, when you gather in from the field the fruit of your labor. 3 times in the year, all males shall appear before God. Okay, so we have festival of unleavened bread, you have festival of harvest, and you have the festival of ingathering at the end of the year. 3 festivals. They're agricultural in nature, and they have no names. It's just simple. You celebrate this. Well, when we read Exodus 34, we see that there is a slight difference. Now we have a little bit more precision in what happens. So you shall keep the festival of unleavened bread. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, as I commanded you at the time appointed in the month of Abib. For the month of Abib you came out of Egypt. All that opens the womb is mine. All male livestock, the firstborn cow and sheep, the firstborn of a donkey you shall redeem with a lamb, and you will not redeem it. You shall break its neck. All the firstborn of your sons you shall redeem. No one shall appear before me empty-handed. So suddenly, from this one in 23, where it just says, don't eat leavened bread, like, wait, now you owe me a sheep. just cuz, right? So we have this kind of change where do this for me to do this for me and bring me a gift. Okay. Now, and then it continues with 6 days you shall work, and the seventh you shall rest, and even in plowing time and harvest you have to rest. And then you shall observe the festival of weeks, the first fruits of the wheat harvest, and the festival of ingathering at the turn of the year. So 3 times you should appear before God. So now the first one, the unleavened bread, right, in Exodus 34 here, has gotten a precision, my Norwegian is coming out, has gotten a provision that makes it clear that you're supposed to bring something to the table, right? And then the other ones are still kind of just do your thing, right? You do the first wheat harvest and then the second one, whatever. Well, when we go to Deuteronomy, we have another version of the law that's there. And this is well known. So we know that Exodus has one kind of law code, and Deuteronomy has one, and Leviticus has another. And so we have like these 3 law codes in the Bible. And so here is the festival calendar in Deuteronomy 16. So observe the month of Abib and keep the Passover to the Lord your God. For in the month of Abib, the Lord your God brought you out of Egypt by night. Okay, already we have a difference. We have a name for it. So it's not the festival of the unleavened bread, but it's called the Passover. And you shall offer the Passover sacrifice to the Lord your God from the flock and the herd at the place that the Lord will choose as a dwelling for his name. You must not eat anything with anything leavened for 7 days, blah, 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 blah. No leaven shall be seen, and none of the meat what you slaughter in the evening of the first day shall remain till morning. And you are not permitted to offer Passover sacrifice within any of the towns that your Lord God is giving you, but at the place that the Lord will choose as a dwelling for his name. Only there shall you offer the Passover sacrifice, in the evening at sunset at the time of day when you departed Egypt. And you have to cook it and eat it at the place the Lord your God chose. And the next morning you may go back to your tents. And 6 days eat the unleavened bread. So where is the place that God chose for his name? It's Jerusalem. It's the temple, right? And so this is a text saying, no, you can't just sacrifice over in your town over there. You must come to the temple. Come to me, sacrifice, right? So you're coming here to this central place. And then it says, count 7 weeks and begin to count the 7 weeks from the time the sickle is put into the standing grain. It's a lovely description. And you keep the festival of the weeks. And then you have to contribute a free will offering in proportion to the blessing that you have received from the Lord your God. Rejoice before your God, and blah, 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 blah. And remember you were slaves and all that. And then you have to keep the festival of booths for 7 days, when you have gathered from the threshing floor and the winepress, and rejoice during it, and blah, 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 blah. So 3 times a year you have to do this. So to recap, we've moved from do your thing. First, an unleavened bread festival. Then you do one for the harvest, and you want to do one for the other harvest. However you want. To bring me a lamb. To everybody, sacrifice your lambs, but you can't do it out in your towns. You have to come to Jerusalem to make your sacrifices for God. We need to gather this all together. Right? And then we're making it clear that you also have to bring, for this other festival, you have to bring something in proportion to the gifts that you've been given. Like, I mean, that's like something out of a communion, not a communion. I've been out of the church so long, I forget the words, but like, what do they call it when they try to get money from people at like your
tithe?
Yeah, like when the tithe speeches, sermons they give, to each has been given, you shall give.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
You'll
get 10 times, you'll get a tenfold and all that. Yeah.
But then we have this third version of the law that's in Leviticus, which is just listen to the regulations of what people are supposed to bring. So these are the appointed festivals of the Lord, the holy convocations which you shall celebrate at the time appointed for them. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at twilight, there should be a Passover offering for the Lord. And on the 15th day, the same month, the festival of unleavened bread to the Lord. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. That's great. Now, the Lord spoke to Moses, speak to the people and say to them, when you enter the land I'm giving you and reap its harvest, you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. He will raise the sheaf before the Lord, and you may find acceptance. On the day after that, the priest shall raise it. And on the day when you raise the sheaf, you shall offer a lamb, a year old, without blemish, as a burnt offering to the Lord. And the grain offering with it shall be 2/10 of an ephah of choice flour mixed with oil, an offering by fire pleasing to the Lord. And the drink offering shall be of wine, 1/4 of a hin. And you shall eat no bread or parched grain or fresh ears until that very day, until you've brought the offering to your God. It is a statute forever through your generations and all your settlements. And then we continue. And so we do the same thing for the next one, the Pentecost. Then bring your settlements 2 loaves of bread as an elevation offering, right?
Yeah, you gotta elevate that joke.
Elevate that. And then they make choice flour baked with leaven as first fruits of the Lord. And you shall present the bread with 7 lambs, a year old without blemish, 1 young bull and 2 rams. And there shall be a burnt offering along with the grain offering and their drink offerings, an offering of fire, a pleasing odor to the Lord. And then you shall also offer 1 male goat for a sin offering and 2 male lambs as a year old as a sacrifice of well-being. And the priest will raise them with the bread and the first fruits as an elevation offering before the Lord, together with the 2 lambs. I mean, and it just goes on and on and on. All of the different things, all the food you have to bring when you go to sacrifice, right? And so, like, these are the appointed festivals, and they're burnt offerings and grain offerings and sacrifices and drink offerings, each on its proper day, apart from the Sabbaths of the Lord and apart from your gifts and apart from all your votive offerings and apart from all your free will offerings, which you give to the Lord. But Derek, tell me something. Who received these offerings on behalf of the Lord?
The priest.
The priests. Who wrote this text?
The priests.
The priests, right? I mean,
obviously it's God inspired.
But I just love it. I mean, I seriously love it. So I love food. I'm like, I love food. And I love the fact that the priests would be like, so I want the lamb to be exactly a year old. I want it to have no blemish. So I want a young lamb, nice tender meat, and I with my lamb I'd prefer to have it with fresh bread and wine, please. And it can be a little too much of the lamb. So next time, bring me a goat and a bull. Oh yeah, I'd like some beef. Bring me some beef and make some bread with yeast in it next time. And I mean, and this is all like listed up in the text. You do this and you do this and you do this 3 times a year, but this isn't enough because you need to do all these other sacrifices and offerings and all this kind of stuff that is supposed to be a pleasing aroma for the Lord. And this is the ritual law, which is supposed to then mean that the people are keeping the covenant with God. Yeah, that's it. That was the end of my presentation.
Oh man, there's so many good things. Actually, pull it back up. Yep. Go to the first place where they're giving in sacrifice. So not where they're just doing the grain offerings, but here it is, verse 19. All that first opens the womb is mine. This is where human sacrifice, I think, also gets a hint.
Yep.
I wanted to mention this because I thought, hold up. Everything, how you talked about later where it's like as much as you're given is as much as you need to give.
Yep.
It's like, well, if God gives you a firstborn son, you need to give that firstborn son as an offering. Yeah. At some point this ends. And I know Francesca Stavrakopoulou, she wrote her dissertation on this very issue, which I want to interview her on. But anyway.
Yeah. I mean, and it's so what happens is that there is a development in the Hebrew Bible that we can see because there's this idea that you have to redeem things. You have to redeem your firstborn. And what redeeming means is that you're basically paying to not kill it. I mean, that's the idea that it should be sacrificed, but you go and you pay a fee,
right?
And then you don't have to sacrifice it. So
I
that's
think,
like,
don't they change it to pay a fee? It sounds like in one of the earlier, almost like a
right,
fossil.
exactly. And so we have these little fossils, a few places that definitely give us the very clear impression that you would sacrifice the human, but that eventually then they develop a way out, right? So you can kind of keep the law and keep the practice of that every firstborn belongs to God, but that you don't actually have to kill people anymore. So there is that change, and I mean, we'll give all credit to the development there, that they stopped killing firstborns.
Right,
But,
right.
you know,
That's that. I just wanted to point that out as I
yeah,
highlight something that when you take the Hebrew Bible and you start to look at the law, you could see an evolution happening, which might help us date, not pin down, but at least in chronology, one must be older probably than the other.
yeah,
And using the model you just described, it's like you really should ask yourself the question: did God really inspire these texts? I mean, I'm speaking to the fundamentalist, right? Like most people who don't buy this anymore or never did would be like, well, obviously this looks like a racket. Like it looks like a great way to make sure the priests who are employed as priests are making a good living. And there's other questions on how this system even becomes more beneficial when the diaspora is on the scene, because how are you going
mm,
to have fresh bread when you don't have an oven to bake in?
yeah,
You're not local. You have to travel. So now you have to bake your bread. You have to find it. And then, there's even the issue of like, here you're bringing these cattle, and if there's a single blemish, they'll take it. You kind of wonder if they ran out of cattle as people came and bought them, and they're just reusing the blemished ones, saying they're not. There's all sorts of hypotheticals to think of. Or are they really 1 year old? Oh, this 2-year-old cattle would just say is a 1-year-old to the people. And then, oh, we have the exact kind of sacrifice you need. Like humans do this.
yeah.
And you can see the thumbprints of like man all over this.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think it's for me one of the most interesting things in that kind of religious history way of looking at it
Mhm.
is that we have these fingerprints all over the Hebrew Bible. We see so many ways in which people have actually both taken advantage of other people by using religious things like the priests kind of saying, bring me more food, and the temple taxes and things like that. But then also the opposite, that they did have traditions that were bad, and later texts kind of say maybe we shouldn't have been doing that, and they're trying to negotiate it, but they can't quite get rid of all the fossils. And so there is a development in a better direction too. I mean, it's not just that everything gets worse and worse, but there's that kind of negotiation going on that is just so clear that it's not a one eternal statement that is true for for all eternity,
Right.
but there's these kind of human touches throughout it that are saying, wait a minute, that was a really bad idea. Let's not kill our babies. Let's do something different. And then somebody says, well, you could pay me, some shekels, and then you'll have redeemed that child. And you're like, that's a really good idea. Here, priest, take my money. I won't kill my baby.
And now keep in mind, this is something that I think is important in the human sacrifice thing. And I know that you didn't like that's not your specialty, but you're well
Mm,
aware of this, I'm sure. People might go, why would they want to kill their babies to begin with? We know the Aztecs did
mm,
human sacrifice. We know there are other cultures across the world who had human sacrifice. But like when we talked about earlier in this episode about lightning and thunder and all these natural phenomena that they are assuming are real gods, agents are controlling these phenomena, volcanoes, you name it. You have to ask yourself the question, at what point did they start realizing maybe if I give some of these good things that I've attained in this life that I live, whether it be a child, whether
mm.
it's grain from the land, whatever it might be, I will offer these good things as a sacrifice of my own that I could eat or keep for myself to those phenomena that I'm going to call gods, whatever
Yep.
the gods' names are. And the greatest of those would have been human sacrifice. But at some point, I imagine this just started backfiring when they had lower populations or something, and they realized, like, we can't be killing the very offspring we waited 9 months to produce in order to, like, we're not getting anywhere. So someone shifted the law and like, well, you know, the gods actually, they told us they don't need human sacrifice. They just need to know that we have offered them, kind of like we baptize our children into the church. We're kind of selling their soul and their life, if you will, to this religion in our minds, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, and I think you're spot on. I think one of the really interesting things is to see how, you know, of course, there's not really much human sacrifice, but like all of the other things that we needed the gods to do before, a lot of people would just put to that one God now, right? And so it's when things get out of control, you know, so there's been a drought in Europe, you know, and what are the churches doing? Well, they're praying for relief from the drought. There's been a drought in California, and what are churches doing out there? They're praying for relief from it. You know, when there's flooding, what do they say? Well, God, you know, stop the flooding. You know, and they do give that agency to God still, but it's just that it's kind of all subsumed into that one God, but it's only there when things go wrong. You know, and sure, sometimes there's this, oh, we give God thanks for the beautiful weather or whatever, you know. And so there is that idea that God controls everything. And that I think that's pretty widespread. And especially when you get into the more conservative and fundamentalist Christianity, you definitely get that idea. But where we see it the most is in these prosperity gospel, give me your money, I'll make you rich kind of things, that really get people to believe it. I mean, they really get people to send money into their churches where say, yeah, just give us an offering, seed money of $100 and it'll grow 100-fold. It says it in scripture, and people do it, you know, because they believe, send your money to God's thing, bless this money, it'll explode.
Yeah, I imagine the Jews thought the same thing of their scriptures. Obviously, it was preserved for a reason, and they find it sacred. And this is why I think they were bending things throughout their later oral traditions about, well, no, these oral traditions go back to Moses, but you can imagine they bend some of the stuff to fit their modern ethics and whatnot they're dealing with, especially when they're competing in a world of Gentiles who have more inclusive laws than they did. They had a pretty exclusive view of things, and that's why I enjoy Cattell Berthelot's book. It's actually right above my head, the black book right there. Nice. It's blurry, but it's Jews and the Roman Rivals, about how pagan Rome impacted the Jews. Really interesting.
Yeah.
I'll take a couple super chats as we So is it Nafrin? I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly, but thank you so much for the super chat. You had a comment above this, and I just did not want to leave you hanging. What do you tell people who say, yes, Jews were polytheist, but the one only God appeared to them, so they know about the one only God, Yahweh?
Yeah, I mean, so you're right. It's I mean, clear that there were polytheistic practices in ancient Israel. So that's clear. And then that's their story. I mean, I think you're exactly right. That's the story that would be told, is that they were polytheists, and then the God appeared to them, and some didn't catch on in the beginning, but that the total story is that they in the end were all convinced, or that the majority were convinced, and that's why Judaism is a monotheistic religion. I just think it's a story. That's the only real difference. I think that's great that they. I think you're describing exactly what the story of the Bible is. So it's just whether or not that story is historically true is the point of contention. It's not so much whether that's the story. So I think definitely you're right that's a very good argument, but I just don't think it's true.
You don't buy it? You're not going to go and offer your firstborn? I'm just kidding.
Yeah. I don't think he'd let me. He's a little big for that now.
Well, I don't know. You've read the story of Abraham.
Yeah, he can. My firstborn. He's bigger than me now. He can take me.
You got to trick him. Tell him to lay down. We'll wrap him up with ropes and make sure, bring down the dagger. We hope an angel appears out of nowhere and says, "Stop! It's okay. We know you'll do it." JT Warren, thank you for the super chat. Why did the Assyrians come against the Assyrian siege, and why record the capture of Lachish unless it was a real accomplishment?
So why did the Assyrians come against the Assyrian siege? I'm not sure I understand what that question is. I think the Assyrians probably did take Lachish. I'm not concerned with that. If you're referring to the debate I had with Jonathan a while back, I think what we didn't agree on was whether or not God murdered a whole bunch of Assyrian soldiers outside of Jerusalem. I think that Hezekiah paid a tribute, and I think after the defeat of Lachish, there wasn't much ambition left, and the Assyrians pulled out without having to be slaughtered by an angel of the Lord.
Do you think the later development where they're talking about how mice and this and that is all because they're trying to explain why he didn't destroy them? But really, if the historical kernel is, here's a lot of money, dude, we don't want any problems. Listen, please don't destroy us. Here's a ton of gold. But but later they're telling their own stories like, yeah, we kicked their ass, man.
Yeah. Well, I think there's probably two separate traditions, because I think the Egyptian story about the mice is also an Egyptian story about the fact that they thought that they were going to get overrun by the Assyrians, but they didn't. And the same thing happened in Judah. So I don't have any problem with the historical reality that the Assyrians came, made it most of the way down through the Levant, so to around Jerusalem, Lachish, and in the plains, and fought with both the Egyptians and the Judites, and then turned back, because we know that they did. And then they turn back, and then they're not decimated, so they go and destroy Babylon. Like, they go destroy Babylon, so they're not decimated by mice or men or angels. So it's,
Thank you for that super chat. Faith not works. I figure I'd address why not. You got a comment here. Adam and Eve believed in one God. So please tell me when the Jews were polytheistic. And then, hold on. It says Adam and Eve believed in more than one God.
But Adam and Eve are fiction. So I'm not even gonna I don't know what to do with that comment. So as a historical reality, I mean, there wasn't a Adam and Eve. I don't think many people still hold that position, that there was a couple that lived in paradise and wouldn't have died had they not screwed up by eating the wrong tree, or eating from the wrong tree. Because
even William Lane Craig is like, no, it didn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, most apologists now have realized that that's a very difficult thing to defend, and so I don't think. But even okay, so let's take it at face value and say, so if I understand your argument correctly, then what you're saying is that because the first couple were monotheists, then every single person in the rest of history should have been? Like, I don't get it, because Adam and Eve weren't Jews.
Were they even, I was going to say, is that even a proper word to use at this time in Genesis?
No, there was no Judaism. There was no Jews.
I was thinking there was no monotheism. I imagine henotheism. There was a single God they may worship, but there was a plurality of deities in Genesis in the creation act, right?
Yeah, well, I mean,
are we getting to the second story?
Yeah, I think it's mixing up all these levels of history and composition and all these kind of things, right? No matter what we do, how we try to answer that. And so no matter what we do, like, they're living in a world where literally almost every one of their descendants is a polytheist. A polytheist. I say a polytheist.
Apollo.
A polytheist. And so there's not. I don't see any really good reason why saying Adam and Eve were monotheists has any relevance. They certainly thought that the snake was worth listening to. So it seems that they were at least poorly convinced of the powers of this one God if they would listen to a snake on legs, which
talked.
Which talked.
Yeah, because that's true. But also, I did a post about this on Twitter. I am on Twitter. I don't play around with it too much because it's one of the most toxic platforms I've ever seen on planet Earth so far. But I saw a post by this guy, Grant R. Castleberry, and he actually is located near where I moved from recently. And he says, Adam is not myth. Job is not myth. Noah and the global flood are not myth. Jonah and the great fish are not myth. When the Bible details an event, that event actually happened in history. So I just wrote, because I am a Sumeri apologist, if you will, or a meso apologist. Enkidu is not myth. Utnapishtim is not myth. Gilgamesh and the global flood are not myth. And Dagon, the great fishman, are not myth. When Mesopotamia details an event, that event actually happened in history. So,
did you get a response from him?
No, I got a ton of people who shared it and just hearted or whatever.
That's hilarious. Very well done, sir. I appreciate that.
I didn't want to, some people were in the chat just kind of wanting to jab at him. Yeah. I figure why not get an older story and or older characters of older stories and then just be like, this is true. This is when it documents that this happened, it's true. And so why not? Kelly, thank you for the super chat. Any connection between the Israelites' Sabbath, seventh day resting, and other gods such as Saturn? Why is the number 7 special? Great question.
Yeah. So I mean, this isn't my speciality. Is that something we just say in the South? Is that
no speciality?
It ain't my speciality.
No, it ain't no special.
Oh man, I'm letting my roots come out here.
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, so what we know is that there are other traditions that do have the number 7 as important and then do follow a rest cycle and things like that. There's some Akkadian evidence of it, and we don't know exactly why 7 shows up, because 7 is the one number there that is random, I guess you could say. We have a lunar cycle that is 28 days basically, and so you could argue that it's 4 times 7 is the 28, and that might be the origin of it or something like that. And that, or it's the closest, 7 is the closest thing that both fits into 364, 365, and 28. And so you can do the week and the year and the month, or week and the month and the year. But it is the thing that's not governed by one of the heavenly bodies. And so it is a bit strange. And so but there's books, big books written on it, but I'm not the expert there.
I was just pulling our friend Francesca Stavrakopoulou's book. Yep. I took some notes on this as I was reading it, and I was getting into Inanna. I don't know if it's in this one, just to read this. Inhu Duana, Inanna is a deity so powerful that her divinity surpasses even that of the highest gods. An and Enlil, who have willingly ceded their wisdom to her, in your vast wisdom amongst all the gods, you alone are majestic. Inhu Duana exclaims. In this poem, Inanna not only governs the forms of wisdom graciously bestowed upon mortals, such as expertise in warfare, ritual, economics, sex, and medicine, but curates and controls the divine wisdom underpinning the very foundations of the cosmos, to destroy, to create, to cut apart, to establish. Inanna are yours. To turn a man into a woman and a woman into a man, Inanna are yours. A large and expensive... We could use that for today, right? Inanna. Yeah. People should start worshiping Inanna again. A large and expansive heart, Inanna are yours. Almost 2,000 years later, another poet was crediting just one deity with the wisdom to create and destroy, and for him, it was Yahweh. But there's also an interesting part about the seven, and it's not explicitly like within their rituals the way that I see it in the biblical, like they really emphasize seven, but it is dealing with this seven idea. Okay, here, many centuries later in the sixth, the goddess Inanna traveled from her temple in Uruk to Nippur in the hope of rousing Enlil. Feigning my father's fanes lying down, she cried, may I soothe his heart, may I pacify his liver, may I direct my words to his distressed heart. Sitting on his lap, she sings him awake with the refrain, O sleeping one, how long will you sleep? Inanna's lament was considered so powerful that her cult singers recited it in her temple at Uruk on the 7th day of each month in the hope of appeasing the gods for any unknown misdemeanor which might prompt untimely or simulated slumber. Precautionary measures were only sensible. Discerning the difference between a sleeping god and a sulking god was not always easy. Many centuries later, in the 6th century BCE, Yahweh's worshippers were singing petitions to awaken him to the devastating aftermath of the Babylonian attack. Rouse yourself. Why do you sleep, O Yahweh? Awake. Do not cast us off forever. But this sleeping motif, I imagine like it's like in case any accidental. In fact, when I used to speak in tongues, the Christians told me you build your faith by speaking in tongues more because you don't know what the hell it's doing. But you're also like, often Christians would tell me, you're asking God to forgive you for things you don't even consciously know that you've committed. Wow. So I'd be in my car driving going, and thinking, all right, I'm covering my sins. I'm not even kidding you. I know it sounds nuts, but I'm dead serious.
That's cool.
And
yeah, but so if we could just we'll circle back to Kelly here, because you're reading about Inanna and Inanna is Saturn, right? I mean, this is one of those connections that we have, and so we may have some connections there, like with the rest. But the thing is, we just really don't know enough about how these things happened, how the Sabbath really developed. There's some Babylonian stuff that every 7 days there was a, I think it's actually called like an evil day or something like that in the Babylonian stuff. And then there's probably some Persian influence, Zoroastrianism and stuff like that. But yeah.
Is it Saturn Day?
Saturn's Day, yeah.
Yeah, and Sabbath falls upon this very day, it seems, but it is Friday night to Saturday. So it's it's
Saturn's Day.
Yeah.
But I don't know. And but I love that our days are also mythologically defined. It's
right.
Very nice. Yeah.
Kelly, good question. Thank you. I'm sorry I had to bore you with my reading, but the non-boring part is that was from Francesca Stavrakopoulos. So she's really good on seeing that old stuff. So Bradford Baldwin, thank you for the super chat. Surely priests didn't think their detailed donation instructions were going to be incorporated into text for 3,000 years. But what usage were these for at the time? Where were they posted or sent to?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Where were they posted or sent to? I mean, and this is the question. Like, so I certainly don't know, and I don't think we have a really good idea of how big the Jewish cult was. And by cult, I don't mean cult. I mean the offering of sacrifices. That's like the cultic function of the religious establishment. I don't think we know. And so this is one of those things that I always kind of shout at Jonathan Sheffield when we have debates, is that he just thinks that Judaism is way bigger and way more important in antiquity than what we have evidence for. And so we don't know how many people would have been going to thank you, just a dude.
Thank you for the correction.
Yeah, you're right. So the big thing that we see is that we have these rules and institutions that are very clearly taking care of a priesthood, and the priesthood seems to have functioned very well and has left us their description of the religion and how things should be done. And we don't have as much evidence for what regular people were doing. So we don't know if people were going up to the temple every year, 3 times a year. We don't know for sure, or at least we don't know especially in pre-Roman times. Let's say as we get into Roman times, Herod builds the temple. He kind of increases it during the Hasmonean times to the control. So Hasmoneans from the 140s, I guess. So Maccabeans in 160s and the Hasmoneans in 140s. BC have control of the land of Israel, and that is the time when we see kind of developments happening in government in Judah and in Israel. And so there's a political reality that's different from the time before, when it was controlled by other empires. And then in Roman times, especially with Herod taking over, he builds the temple, or expands the temple and the Temple Mount. He does the palace. He does all these great establishments to kind of increase Judaism. But we just simply don't know whether these were rules and regulations that were read in the villages of Judea and Galilee, and we just don't know whether people had this as kind of knowledge that they had to go up or they did it, or whether these things reflect the common practices that were done. We don't know if everybody did it. We don't know. We just simply don't know enough. And so I agree completely that they didn't write that in order to have some quack like me read it 3,000 years later, 2,400, 2,500 years later, and make fun of it. But the point was to feed the priesthood. Like that was the point. Just like the tithing in Christian churches is that they say, oh, well, it says in the Bible you should give us 10% of everything you make. And then that's it. It's to feed your pastor, and their building projects.
I mean, I just think it's obvious. The priests are in it to make sure that they're getting more out of it, right?
Well, yeah, and I mean it's the same thing. I'm a professor, so I tell students they should study religion. I mean, I think it's valuable. I think what I do is a good thing. I like what I do. I think it's important also, and I think it's a very interesting subject to study religions and the history of religions and languages and all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, it also is what buys my food.
Yeah.
So you're doing the same thing. You're out there.
No,
and so what we do is in order to get a day's living, like we contribute to society in the ways we do in order to get paid for sustenance. And I think so. I don't blame the priesthood for doing that. Like that maybe that's the important point, is that I'm not critical of the priesthood per se for doing that.
I think it's. Would you agree that it's because of
inflation?
Modern, money hungry, smack you over the head, poor gullible grandmother sitting on a couch being tricked by some TV evangelist who sucks her out of $1,000 she doesn't have because she lives on a fixed income because she's afraid or whatever, she wants to get a blessing, and they're ripping her off. It's really, I wonder if the motivation plays into that, and then projecting it back onto the poor Israelite living with their 5 sheep, and they're just trying to survive. And here are these priests, maybe, I don't know. I don't know how successful they were. They might be flying in their ancient airplanes, so to speak, compared to the rest of the society, and sitting in temples, doing whatever the hell they want. I don't know. I'm just.
I think we at least have to be careful not to project that reality into the ancient text.
I'm just saying
the ancient airplanes and all that, but
I'm teasing.
But you have, I think you have a point in that it's just that we don't know. Like, we do think of the priesthood as an elite class in certain ways. So they would have have access to a level of society that was different, but they also seem to have been a class that really needed protecting and taking care of, and so they were reliant on the gifts and the hospitality of their neighbors. So it's probably not as glamorous as the guys with their private jets and the Benzes and whatever they drive around in. But
I'm with you. I'm just teasing. I ask if that's like the motivation why we would like have a judgment looking on these texts. But as far as the historical reality, of course, it's completely different. I'm just trying to compare it, like the guy flying in jets compared to the typical mom living on a fixed income.
Yeah, definitely.
And but then again, you're right. As far as writing, the society wouldn't have had these skills that they did have. And there's a lot of different things we can get lost into.
And again, like I think just the fact that that what I'm interested in is just seeing the human touch, like the hand of the priests on the development of the writing, that seems to be, it seems to fit into that narrative of saying, well, God said you should give me more food. And that's that's very suspicious. And it doesn't mean they didn't need more food. It just means that they were forming the texts and using the power of the religious, the sacred scripture in a way to get it.
Someone brought up earlier that I saw it in the chat, burnt offerings, that they burnt the entire animal to like ashes. And so the priest never ate.
No, that's not right. So there were some that were burnt offerings that were burnt up, but there were also burnt offerings that were just burnt, like that were just put over the fire and then taken off. So there's complete, I think the word is actually like Holocaust offerings, like burnt through and through. And that's, so that's one thing. But then there's also burnt offerings that aren't burnt to smithereens. They're just burnt up, or parts of it are burnt. The intestines are burnt or things like that. And then the meat is actually saved. So.
Wow. I never really thought about the term Holocaust used that way. And I kind of now I'm wondering if that was purposely done. I know that's a gory history to get into, but you kind of wonder, that's out of your area of expertise. But the term Holocaust, being that Jews were cooked in the Holocaust, I wonder if this is a jab because, maybe the Germans in Nazi Germany or whatever hated the Jews so much and the religion that they became a burnt offering in the ovens. I don't know.
I don't know the history of the development of the word well enough, but at least in Jewish tradition, the term Holocaust is used to talk about a burnt offering which was completely burnt up. So, but so I mean, I would guess there's a reason why that was placed on that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Heavy stuff. I don't know why that came to mind when I'm picturing an animal.
Yeah, no, I mean, but we use that. Yeah, but that's we're using the terms. I mean, I walked into that one, but that's the word. I think you can go you can go look it up. I would guess, but I'm sure it's Greek. It's hello, like whole costas, burnt or something, burnt whole, burnt up, something like that. So it's a Greek term, but yeah. Anyway, I wonder if we're nearing the end of our thing.
No, we are. We literally, that was it. I just took you on a little ride there at the end. I hope everybody goes in the description, checks out his academia. You've written obviously extensively on Jubilees. You're well aware of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And what I loved about that, just the big walk away, there is an episode that we go into on our channel with Dr. Monger. I hope you check out, is how the canon is not fixed. They're rewriting scripture at this period. I mean, they do that throughout the canon. In your debate with Jonathan Sheffield, you point out like they did this with David. David was really, really bad in many cases. And what did the later authors do? Whitewash David. The same goes for other people throughout the Hebrew Bible. And a lot of this literature, even Genesis, gets rewritten. So Jubilees is doing this with Genesis, rewriting it. Literally, if you wanted to try and say, let me put them side by side, they contradict in many areas, or they just don't, narrative-wise, they don't line up in many ways. So please check out his academia. Check out Dr. Monger. You also have a Google. Just type in his name. You'll find it out. And also get true salvation. Okay? Like we tell you all the time, I try to warn you about the upcoming end of all things. But you really do want to be protected by the gods of MythVision. We definitely have unriddled, if you will, the deities in these ancient texts. What we have is the real deal. So come by your indulgences through us. We don't try to hide that they're indulgences. See, we're honest with you. We tell you the facts up front. We're not trying to trick you and to telling you you need to offer 7 indulgences. See, we're animals or whatever, burnt offerings, etc. So help us out. Join us. Any final words from you, Dr. Mott?
I'm just happy to get to hang out, Derek. This is good. I appreciate what you're doing, and I just I figure that in ancient days you would be deified and placed on a white horse somewhere and made statues of and all that. So yeah, but
it's gonna happen.
We'll get there. Yeah,
we'll get there. I think we'll all be on a pantheon there. See, I'm very fair. I think it's good to share. I don't mind if I'm Marduk in this situation, but I want everybody to be treated pretty fairly and not to be, treated less than. So the pantheon should be pretty good wherever we head.
Nice.
Thank you so much. Everybody check him out. I can't wait for you to publish some stuff in English. We can start getting your material out. I really can't.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, man.
Never forget, ladies and gentlemen, we are MythVision.